Hello, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get us going. I really appreciate you joining me this evening. And I hope that you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving break and are feeling a little refreshed coming back into the class. I know the schedule is a little wonky, for lack of a better word, when we do have a holiday in the middle of the class. So thank you for bearing with the odd scheduling in terms of the assignments and the class meetings, but it should be pretty consistent from here out and on our regular schedule. And with that being the case, my grading schedule is a little bit off of where I would typically like to be at this point in the week. I am wrapping up the grading and feedback for the week 1 Photoshop practice, and I'm down to just a handful of those remaining. So you will be seeing that feedback if you haven't already. So I'm going to finish that up tonight and then get right on top of the mood board projects, the first component, which I've gone ahead and downloaded all of those, and we'll be taking a look at those throughout the day tomorrow. So hopefully I can get those knocked out then, and you will have feedback on that going into the second component. And I may have mentioned in week 1, but the mood board project is an ongoing project. So with the grading, once I give feedback, you have an opportunity to make revisions, and I will take a look. I'll look back at the previous week's component and see what changes have been made, and you can earn back up to 10 points if you had any deductions based on based on the changes that you do make. So just to give an opportunity to see the feedback and take that into account and learn from that. So that's something to think about as we move into the next part of the project. Other than that, I believe because of the weird schedule, tonight is the exploration assignment, which is dealing with color in movie posters, and that's an interesting one. So hopefully I won't keep you here too long so you can get to that project, but did want to go over the material so you'll be a little more informed. Typically, I do like to have the explorations graded before we get to class because it gives me something more to talk about, because then I can use your examples. Are there any questions or any concerns that anybody has before we get into the material for the week? Are you guys able to hear me okay? Okay. All right. Hopefully, I noticed Regina was having some audio issues. Hopefully that's something that will be resolved. Oh, okay. No, I just was commenting on, I believe because of the schedules changes, the exploration for this week was due tonight. Typically those are due on Tuesdays. And I usually like to have those graded by now, but we'll get back onto the regular schedule next week, hopefully. Okay, so if we're all on track, then I'll go ahead and get into this week's material, which is all about color. So we started last week talking about visual story, and that was the combination of words and imagery in order to create a deeper meaning. And if you recall, our definition for aesthetics was the interaction of various elements in order to create a perceptual reaction. So some of these elements do include the use of color. We have imagery, we have text communicating a message, but the color within that imagery and the color used on that text also helps to influence how it's perceived and how a viewer will respond to that, how they interpret that meaning. Color is something that's been studied for centuries by visual artists and is pretty well has gotten pretty well understood, and they've really got it down to a science, and that is actually the discipline of color theory, which we'll talk about tonight. And color theory is a very formal look at how colors interact with one another, how they look when they're paired together, and the kind of visual energy that they convey. And I'll mention visual energy a lot when I'm talking about with energy. If I use energy, is simply the feeling of excitement or dynamic action that's given by an image, as opposed to something that feels more subdued or more mellow. So it's really sort of an emotional thing. And then the other component of that is color psychology. And color psychology is sort of the symbolic meanings that we attribute to colors. A lot of this is cultural, things that we learn to associate with certain colors, whether it's due to specific holidays or symbols like streetlights and so forth. Sometimes it's innate, it's instinctual, like the color red being a symbol of danger or distress. And so that's something we'll get to as we go along. Just to get into a little bit of terminology, because you'll hear me say these words. Some of these terms, when we're in everyday conversation, we'll use them interchangeably, like they all mean the same thing, but they do have very specific meaning in formal color theory. So that's the word hue refers to a specific color, like a pure color, yellow or green or violet. And then if you have a darker variety of that hue, that's a shade. So if you are mixing paints and you mix black paint into your yellow, then you get a darker yellow, and that's a shade. Whereas a tint is the opposite, it's lighter. It's if you mixed in white paint, it would become a tint of that color hue. So as I'm going through, I'll use those terms. I'll try to stick to using those terms in their true meaning. Sometimes I'll slip up, but just so you know what I'm referring to. Also, has anybody ever used the color wheel before, either in an art class or in personal projects? Yes, okay, Jesse has. Several of you. Okay, good. Then you're pretty familiar, you might be familiar with how this works. The color wheel was developed, well, actually a pretty long time ago, and it's what I didn't know until fairly recently, and I've used them for years, but didn't realize that they're actually based on how our eyes perceive color. With the rods and the cones, the color receptors in our eyes can perceive specific wavelengths of color, and but some colors compete. So it's almost like a switch. It can either detect this color or this color, but not both at the same time. And that's these pairs, the opposites on the color wheel. We'll call complementary pairs. I'll get to that term in a moment. So when those colors are paired together, it creates sort of an electric energy, like a clash of color, because they are competing for that that the optic nerve's attention, whereas those that are closer together are more similar and do not have that same kind of clashing perception. So without really knowing that, artists, the specifics, just based on their perceptions, the artists have arranged the colors in this wheel, the color wheel that we're familiar with today, and allows us to have that reference. We can easily look at this and see which colors are going to be harmonious together, which ones are going to really clash or have more of a dynamic contrast. And that's going to be an important factor in a moment. The colors are also divided into warm and cool colors, and that's roughly splitting the color wheel down the middle. Cool colors are those that give the impression of coldness, of ice or cool water, usually the blues and the greens and the violets. And so all of this half of the color wheel, whereas the warm colors are those that call to mind fire or heat, oranges and reds and yellows. And they have very specific perceptual impressions. Warm colors actually, when you see a warm color like red or orange, it will look like it's popping out. It will look like it's jumping into the foreground of a two-dimensional image, whereas cool colors tend to recede away. Warm colors tend to be more action-oriented and energetic, which kind of makes sense if you think about heat having more energy, and coldness being the lack of energy, more sedate. And so cool colors are more calm and subdued, maybe even more depressed. If you think about when someone says you're feeling blue, that actually is literally feeling depressed. So that's a little aspect of color psychology as well. And so pairing these together, if you pair a warm color with a cool color, again, it gets that contrast and it helps create that dynamic range. And we'll look at examples of that too. So once they've established the color wheel, visual artists, had this reference of which colors had high contrast, which ones were more harmonious or more similar, and they kind of set down some specific color relationships, some basic color relationships that they could easily kind of pull out of their artist tool bag to apply when they wanted to create a specific impression. The most basic is monochromatic, and that means one color. Mono meaning single and chroma being color. So monochromatic is one color hue. So remember, that's the pure color. So a monochromatic composition only has a single color. It's very limited. The entire image would only be that color. It could be the tints and the shades of that color though. So you do have a little bit of a range, but it doesn't deviate from that single hue. And the example, this is a fine art example from Pablo Picasso. And you see that even though it's only using blue, by using that range of lights and darks, it still has a sense of form and depth, shadow, and so forth. So you can still create a meaningful image. It just doesn't have the same energy as more color-rich compositions, but it can be very elegant and tends to be very calm. It depends on if you're using warm versus cool colors, how much energy it has. But generally, this is going to be very limited. And here's some more modern day compositions. Yeah, like Frozen. Yeah, and most of you are taking art history along with this course. Is that right? So maybe some of these paintings might be familiar, hopefully. Do you like to give examples from fine art just to show where this all comes from, and then kind of bring in some more current examples? Since we are looking at movie posters, here's an example of a monochromatic movie poster, a Matt Damon film, and you see it's the same blues, right? It's that monochromatic blue, but still have depth, and the coolness of the blue color really connects with the imagery. It looks like we're in the clouds. It's sort of like, I haven't seen this film, but it looks like it has a theme of sort of an afterlife, which we always think of as being sort of this very ethereal cloud, like clouds in heaven. And so the cool colors really connect with that really well. From a branding standpoint, here's a logo design for Intel. And just give me your thoughts on this. Why would Intel, being a producer of computer components, use a monochromatic blue logo design as opposed to some of the other options? Okay, Jennifer says to stand out. And that is certainly a part of any branding effort, is to make yourself unique and different from the competition. Yeah, and as by extension of that, as Jesse says, so that becomes part of their identity. And blue is a very tends to be a formal color. You think about like a navy blue uniform, or the police uniform, or even business suits can often be that very formal blue. The primary colors tend to be very conservative and reserved, and so as a company that produces business machinery and components, that would be suitable for their purpose. And just to show the difference that the warm colors make, here is a monochromatic warm composition. So you see the difference in the feel between this and, whoops, wrong way, and the Gladiator poster. There's a much more feeling of action there, isn't there? There's more energy because of that, those warm colors. And then once you add in those dark shadows, it gives it a very serious and grim feeling, which that movie really does capture. So clearly, these are all monochromatic, and they're pretty effective designs. They really work for the subjects that they represent, but that can be very limited, having a single color to work with. And usually that's not going to be the case. We're going to want to have a broader range of colors available to us. And so then we need to know how to pair colors to create the impression that we want. And that's, again, leveraging that idea of colors that are opposites on the color wheel or contrasting colors that are closer together or more similar. The contrasting colors we call complementary. That's complementary with an E and not an I. So it doesn't just mean that they work well together or they look pretty together. It means that they support one another, they energize one another by their pairing. And these are true complementary pairs, are those that are exactly opposites on the color wheel. So blue and orange is one that's really commonly used. Red and green is another, yellow and purple, and so on. And that can get down to the tertiary colors of like blue green and orange red being complementary. So, but the important part is that colors that are more distant from one another have that dynamic contrasting energy. Whether they're exact opposites or not, the closer they get to the exact opposites on the color wheel, the more clashing they'll be, the more dynamic that feeling will be. Those that are closer together are called analogous, which really means they're similar. They're analogous to one another. And so these are used when you want a more subdued feel, a more calm or laid back feel, as opposed to more action oriented. And much like the monochromatic, this really depends on whether you're using warm colors or cool colors. So you can have analogous cool colors that would be all blues and greens, or blues and violets, or warm colors, reds and oranges, or yellows and oranges paired together. These are the basic color combinations. If you remember these two relationships, you're really going to be pretty set, because then you can really start planning your color schemes pretty effectively, just depending on the kind of visual impression you want to go for. There are more complex color relationships. There's split complementary, which would be, say, two cool colors paired with a single warm color, or vice versa. And then you can get into more and more. If you have four colors that are complementary, that's called tetradic, but you don't have to memorize all of those. I'm not going to expect that. These two really are the ones that I want you to focus on. So here's an analogous example, and you can see how the colors are all pretty similar. It's a very peaceful scene. This is a Claude Monet painting. And so you look at this, and it just is sort of this peaceful summer day, right? It doesn't have a lot of drama or action, and it's just sort of relaxing. And that's really what the analogous colors convey. Very similar color schemes in the Bugs Life poster, as well as the BP logo. So the Bugs Life it's fun. It's lighthearted, but it's not dramatic, which you would get with more complementary colors. And looking at BP, here's ask you again, why do you think they chose those particular colors for their branding? The analogous greens and yellow greens. Okay, Jennifer says attention. I'm thinking about the nature of the BP company too, though. They are, of course, an oil company, petroleum company. Yeah, and Takina, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, says it's a natural. Tashina, okay, I apologize, and I'll get that right from now on. And that's on the right track. Think about what we associate the color green with, and it's usually the environment, right? Environmental friendliness or recycling, or green initiatives means making efforts to be environmentally friendly. Whereas BP is an oil company, which are notorious for being very non-eco-friendly. So this is a very purposeful decision to try to counteract that perception, to try to give themselves a more positive public image in that area. And even the natural kind of flower-looking design of the logo ties into that. So something to really be critical of when looking at logo design, and just use of color in general. All right, so they're analogous cool colors. And then here's the analogous warm color example. A little bit more energetic, but still pretty peaceful scene. Not a lot of drama taking place. And that's typically what the analogous colors are used for. Sometimes they can, I had another image that I didn't include here, but it was a scene from Paris with the Eiffel Tower, and it's warm yellows and oranges, and it looks very romantic and happy. And so, and that's where those analogous warm colors really have their place. And I'm just kind of barreling ahead. Are there any questions so far? Okay, be sure to jump in, post to the chat, or even turn on your mic if you do have any questions as we're going along. So then that brings us to the opposite side of the color relationships, and that's the complementary colors. And as I said earlier, these are the ones that really contrast with one another. And here's a good example of the warm versus cool color relationship. Remember I said that the warm colors tend to pop out, to jump towards the viewer, whereas the cool colors recede away. And this is a painting by Vincent van Gogh, and you can see he's focusing on this night cafe scene and wants to give emphasis to that area where the people are dining. So using that warm color makes it stand apart from the blue of the city at night in a very strong way, and makes it pop out. It makes it jump towards us. So it's really the center of attention. The warm colors also give us a sense of life, of vibrance to that area, whereas the rest of the city is cool and subdued and sleeping. It's a nighttime scene. Another interesting thing, and this is a little bit off topic, is notice his use of lines to direct attention. All of the converging lines directing our eye, even the way that the tables recede kind of pulls us down to this one spot right here. So that's a little interesting side note for on the topic of composition, the use of leading lines. So you can see, just looking at the difference of how the energy plays a part in this. Once you use these complementary colors, it becomes much more energetic. And this is something you'll see, especially with movie posters, when it comes to action films. Blue and orange everywhere you look, and you'll start to notice this now with all of the big summer blockbusters and action films. It's blue and orange all over the place. And why is that? It's because it allows them to take advantage of the warm versus cool color relationship, so that they can establish a clear foreground versus background. It has that added sense of drama and excitement, because you can really make um, uh, the colors clash and stand out in that way. And also, of course, orange is the color of fire. It allows you to use a lot of explosions and kind of put that against the blue sky to create a really good sense of depth and exciting action. I also noticed how the pretty much every skin tone falls into the warm color range. So by putting that against a blue background or a cool black background, it makes the faces oftentimes the center of our emphasis. It helps them to stand out. This is actually something, and I don't know if I still have the slide in this slideshow, but something that's used in news broadcasts. If you look at the news desk, you have your anchor person or the weather person, and the background is always this. A lot of times it'll be a blue cityscape or blue monitors that look like they're showing important information, but you can't really tell what it is. But they put that cool color background there on purpose, so that the talking head of your news reporter remains the center of focus. So those are our two core color relationships, complementary versus analogous. And then with monochromatic being a third option, that's a little bit outside of the dichotomy. Another option is achromatic. And achromatic means no color. So if you think about A being, well, the word chroma being color, A being the lack of color. So this is grayscale. This is black and white imagery, like pen and ink drawing, like the MC Escher illustration here. They can still be very visually interesting, but they don't have the benefit that you could receive by having color contrasts or color relationships. So, so they're kind of outside of that whole realm of the use of color. But they have very specific purposes. Sometimes they can, an achromatic image can create a sense of a specific time period. Like we think of black and white television or black and white photos as being very old-timey, old-fashioned, before the early 20th century. They can also have a very serious look, very grim or gritty. A lot of times really tense suspense films or action films will use this to create that feeling of, kind of a grim future or a very dark situation. And a trick that you can use with achromatic images is to throw in a single little hint of color, and that helps to direct the viewer's attention. It creates an accent point or a point of emphasis. So here's an example, and this is Batman, the Dark Knight Rises poster, and you see it's almost sort of post-apocalyptic in the feel. It really captures the very serious and dark themes of that movie. A lot of the James Bond posters, especially in recent years, have been a similar color scheme. This is actually two of the points that I was describing earlier. This is from Schindler's List, which is shot in black and white, right, to capture the feel of the time period, which was World War II. But then they've used the red coat on the little girl to create an accent, a point of emphasis, as well as perhaps a symbolic meaning. And that's the only hint of color in the film. Any thoughts so far? So this has been sort of a review of some of the material from the lynda.com videos, but I kind of wanted to create that baseline because that's going to inform some of the other topics I talk about. All right, so for the remainder of the class, I wanted to take those ideas and apply them in two different contexts. One is the use of color for storytelling. So this is continuing, or well, we'll start with branding. Storytelling, which is going to be a continuation of visual storytelling that we've already looked at. And the other aspect is color for branding. We're going to do a little bit of branding with your mood board projects, but branding is also a big part of later courses as well, so I wanted to touch on that here. As some of you commented, branding or color helps to create a very unique look for a brand. It associates that color with that company or that product so that it's recognizable. You see that, that color scheme and you immediately know, oh, that's, McDonald's, or that's, what have you, whatever particular colors our brand that is connected with. Let's take a look at this. And this should illustrate just how fundamental the color is to a particular brand. These are two that should be very familiar. And I find people have very strong loyalties to one or the other, usually more so to Starbucks. But watch what happens when we reverse those color schemes. it's sort of for those of us who are kind of immersed in the marketing and attachment to those brands, it's a little bit of a kind of takes you aback, right? Whoa, that's not right, because that becomes such a part of their personality, and when you change that, it's noticeable. It's definitely kind of trips us up a little bit. Here's another case with the brown and gold being really integral to UPS in particular, and then reversing those. So you see, it just doesn't feel right, on a subconscious level, and this is something that is very formally established with any brand. Their color scheme is very much an integral part of their identity. Most companies will have a style guide, which is a formal document that says specifically these are our colors, and this is, it gives instructions on how they're reproduced. And they do that by giving color codes, and those are specific number values that are used for digitally reproducing colors. We're going to do that actually with your mood board. You're going to record your color codes as sort of a simple branding exercise. This is actually directly from the Full Sail Style Guide. I was told not to include the color codes in this case, but it could show the little swatches. And so this should be pretty familiar to you. This burnt orange color and sort of the, I don't really know what this color would be called. It looks like an olive green. It's more of an umber. Actually, technically, I'm told it's a dark shade of yellow, oddly enough. And then the metallic gray is sort of a secondary. And then you see that on the business cards, on any kind of material, as well as the website. This is repeated. And Jennifer, I did see your question. How do you know what color is for our brand? Okay. And the answer is that it's kind of up to you. If you think about what colors you want to be associated with your brand. It could be your favorite color, but also think about how other people will perceive it. Are there, like we looked at Intel earlier, and it uses blue, and perhaps because that's a very formal color and is often appears with more business-like organizations and entities. And so they pick that as their base color. Maybe you want a more formal business-like impression to be created, and so you could go with one of those more reserved primary colors as your brand color. But maybe you want to create a more artistic impression, or a more friendly and upbeat impression. So you might go with orange, or one of the sunnier, warm colors as the base color for your brand. And that's where you start. And then you can decide, do you want to just stick with that and be monochromatic and use that as your color? Or do you want to create a more complex color scheme? You can, create a more dynamic energy. So if you started with orange as your brand, as your base color, you might pair that with a teal or a blue to create that dynamic, complementary energy. Or if you want something that's more subdued and more harmonious and more, more calm, then pair orange with an orange red or a yellow, and it keeps that sunny feel, but isn't really harsh. It isn't really a lot of dynamic excitement. So it's kind of that decision process. What impression do you want to make? What personality do you want to put out there? What kind of energy do you want to put out there? And then once you pick those colors, you stay consistent. And that's the important part, is consistency, sticking, using those same colors. And that's where the color codes are important, because trying to just kind of wing it or pick colors by sight can sometimes be inaccurate. But if you enter those exact color codes into Photoshop or into Illustrator or Adobe Premiere, whatever the case may be, it will reproduce the colors precisely. And so then with looking at this with full cells branding, you'll see those same colors in our course catalog, on the websites. My slides use those. Your mood board templates, I actually stuck with the branding for that as well. And Jennifer, for your question, that's a part of it, is picking the colors. It doesn't have to be 3 colors. If you want to go with a single monochromatic color palette, then you just pick 1. If you want to do a complementary pair, pick 2, or you can go with 3, or you can add more if you want. But the more colors you pick, the you're risking getting a little too busy. So, but the other component is that you need to justify your choices by describing why you picked those colors and how that relationship, how those colors combine to convey the impression that you want to convey for your personal brand and for your design. So, besides simply presenting the colors, I want to see you, talk about why you picked those colors and really show that you have an understanding of these color relationships. And this actually kind of ties back into what we were discussing in terms of how you go about choosing your colors. A lot of times you'll see these charts or websites that give you specific meanings. This is color psychology. But I really don't like to give this cut and dry of a definition. You can't really say blue will always give a sense of dependability and strength, because it might not always. It really depends on the context. It depends on the nature of what it's representing. Because does Oreo use blue as a symbol of strength? Probably not. It's simply the colors that they have had associated with them. I don't know if they have a specific purpose for selecting those colors. Because it doesn't make me think about cookies at all, but we recognize that logo because it's been around for so long. It's recognizable. So don't put too much stock in these specific prescribed meanings. Use this as a helpful reference, but know that it's not really that cut and dry. What I've noticed, and I mentioned this a little bit, is that the more primary colors, and the primary colors are blue, red, and yellow, tend to be used for more reserved organizations or more conservative groups, and I mean conservative in terms of sort of very businesslike, more so than social conservative in that sense, or political meaning. But so if you look at this chart, even say looking at blue, most of these, but not all of them, but most of them are more serious businesses: Dell, J.P. Morgan, Lowe's, AT&T, GE, and so on. So you have financial organizations and business companies that create business machines and so forth. As opposed to purple, which is a little more quirky, right? A little bit more artistic, perhaps, maybe more out of the ordinary. Then you have Sci-Fi Channel, you have Barbie, Yahoo, and some of these that are a little less formal in their feel. So the farther you get from those primary colors, the more kind of out of the ordinary of an impression you'll get. So that's something, that's a trend that I've noticed. Even looking at reds and yellows, you have those more more traditional business organizations. And then with the cheerful orange, there's Hooters and there's Nickelodeon and Fanta and some of these groups that want to be seen as more upbeat and fun. Also think about kind of universal meanings. We talked about green being a symbol of environmental friendliness. It's generally seen as a color of life because green plants are growing and healthy. So a lot of times you can get that kind of impression, and that's exactly what BP was going for, right? But again, it's always context. Think about Monster energy drink. They use the green claw mark looking symbol. That creates a kind of a very stylized letter M, not because they want it to be a peaceful or healthy look, but because it's sort of almost creepy. It's unearthly green that we might see more, used more closer to Halloween. It's sort of that odd ghostly monster slimy look. So consider the context, consider your subject, consider, in your case, your own personal mission statement. What kind of look and feel are you going for? And just a few more examples. Looking up close, we looked at Intel, we looked at BP. Here's a complementary example. The LA Lakers fall into that category as well. You see the little motion blur on the Lakers giving a sense of movement and action, and that pairs with the violet and the orange to give it a little bit of a more exciting look. And a pretty distinctive combination too. Yellow and kind of a gold and purple is not something you often see, and so that gives them a very recognizable appearance. And Firefox, using that classic orange and blue to give a more upbeat and exciting feel. And I called this one split complementary because they have a lot of yellows as well. So the point being, pick your colors, pick colors that represent the energy and the personality that you want to convey, and then stick to those. All of Burger King's packaging, all of their commercials, all of their signage at the stores use these consistent colors, the kind of gold, red, and then blue as an accent, not an accident. And I included this one just to show this is universal, regardless of what medium you're working with, whether it's print or graphic design or web design or even film and TV. These factors still play a part. So when you're creating your website, again, you want to stick with your brand colors, and you still want to create that impression. So in this case, they're trying to create a more lighthearted and fun look. If you look at some of the text, it's great websites, no lame marketing slogans. So obviously they're kind of taking a more fun approach to their public image, and the colors, these complementary colors, help support that. Any thoughts on any of that in regard to branding? And so for this week, that is what is going to be important for your mood board activity. You'll get into storytelling in week 4, and then you'll want to keep that in mind as well. But yeah, so think about your personal brand. And you're making these choices now, but you'll revisit this mood board, in fact, in the graphic design course, and you'll actually create some personal branded pieces like business cards and so forth, and you have a chance to actually apply these color choices at that point. So the other use of color is to enhance storytelling. And this uses the same ideas, the same color relationships, complementary versus analogous and monochromatic. It uses a lot of the same color psychology, although there perhaps is a wider range of color psychology at work here. So comment on this one. What role does the color play in supporting the visual story that's taking place in this ad? And Jesse says driving this car is exciting. Okay, and could you expand on that? Like how does the excitement, that feeling of excitement, connect with the imagery, the wording, and the color? Okay, so red makes it seem exciting and also edgy and daring. So take a look at the composition as a whole and the visual story. So we have this car, and the car is red. And okay, so to associate red with fire, and fire is usually exciting and unpredictable. Okay, that's true. And look at the wording too. So the flame, so there's that connection to fire. Flame of, but not just flame, but flame of desire. So now it's pulling in those feelings of passion and strong emotion. And think about that, and say the holiday of Valentine's Day. What color do you see as being most common then? It's red, right? Because red is sort of the color of passion and strong passionate emotion, like desire, for instance. So that red is just visualizing the emotions that are conveyed in the wording. And also there's the emphasis on the look of the car. It's not just looking at the sort of the useful features of the car, but its appearance. And then so it's trying to emphasize that sort of visceral, that physical aspects of desire. Yes, and that's a great point, Regina, about the size of the text. That's something we'll talk about next week, actually, when we talk about visual hierarchy. But notice that they have purposely emphasized the flame of desire, and that is, done with very, very specific intention in mind, because that is the theme, or the overall slogan of this particular ad campaign. So the part that color plays in visual storytelling is really to sort of underscore the emotion, the feeling, and the energy that is taking place in that scene, in that image. It's very much comparable to the musical score in a movie, where you have, say, in a horror movie, and there's that little violin sound that gives us a feeling of tension, and it slowly builds up until we know something terrible is about to happen. And then, of course, it's just a cat jumping out to scare us. But color is similar to that. It underscores the action in a very subtle and almost unconscious manner. This is a wonderful infographic that someone took a lot of time building. What this graphic shows is the use of color throughout the entire series of Breaking Bad. And I don't know if you guys watched Breaking Bad. If not, there's going to be some spoilers in this little segment of the class. So I apologize in advance. What the creator of this graphic has done is gone through each episode of the series Breaking Bad and looked at what colors are associated with each character within the scenes in those episodes, and they've laid it out in a timeline. And of course, Walter White is the main character, and he's got the largest timeline. But I really like to look at Jesse Pinkman down here on the right, and he is another one of the major characters. And if you've watched the show, you know that Jesse he's a young man. He's very hot-tempered, runs off at the mouth a lot, and has quite a vocabulary of curse words. And so not surprisingly, we see a lot of warm colors in his timeline, because that really visualizes that idea of this hothead, a lot of hot tempers. But it's not always the case, is it? So we see early on in the series, and this might be the shirt he's wearing, or the room he's in, the color of the furniture, the color of the walls, the car he's driving. It's just the colors associated with that character. Early on, there's a lot of reds and yellows, and so all this warm color. But then, right around the end of season 1, something happens. All the color goes away, and it's just this long stretch of black. So what's going on there? If we look at the legend down below, that's labeled number 3 on the timeline. It says abducted by Tuco. And in the show, Tuco's a pretty bad guy. He's like a drug lord, and not somebody that you really want to cross. So at that point, all the color goes out of Jesse Pinkman's life. And I can't remember now. I did watch the show, but I can't remember what was happening. He might have been locked in a trunk of a car or something like that, where there is no light or no color. But in any case, that color change signifies that he's in a pretty bad spot. There is no more of this hot-headed energy taking place. He is in trouble. Obviously, things improve when we get back to the old familiar hot-headed Jesse Pinkman with a lot of yellows and reds again. And then right here at point number 5, again, the color goes away. It goes into this sort of gray-green from a deep red. At that point, and here's where the spoilers again come in, it says Jane dies, and Jane's his girlfriend in the show. So the color again drains out of his life. He falls into this deep sort of depression. And then it goes from the gray-green to black and white and gray. So there's no color for a while there, and he goes into rehab at that point. So you see how they've leveraged the color to really underscore what emotion they're trying to associate with that character. And that's common practice. This is something that is just a part of filmmaking, a part of television. As I've said again and again, nothing is left to chance, and this is included in that. The colors are not haphazard, they're picked for a very specific purpose. And if you read that quote down in the lower right, you see that. Vince Gilligan, who's the creator of the show, says, I want us to do the color timing with each of these episodes where you sit with the colorist and make sure that the color for each individual scene is just the way you want it. This might involve planning the wardrobe of your actors or the sets, the colors of the sets, but it could also involve color correction and color grading in post-production, which you're learning to do with Photoshop, right? You're learning how to make some color edits. So you're not stuck with what you started with. You can change those colors through the miracle of modern technology and create a completely different visual impression. Taking a look at some examples. This isn't from Breaking Bad. This is a movie poster for the change up. And look at the way the background colors are used to underscore the specific emotions expressed by the actors here. Jason Bateman struggling with these toddlers. He's got this very troubled look, and that's got that cool blue behind him. So it's that more subdued emotion, and in this case, it's the more troubled emotion. The warm colors, warm orange is upbeat, it's energetic, and Ryan Reynolds' face, reflects that as well. And this is a pretty straightforward, the warm versus cool colors connecting with more subdued versus more upbeat emotions. It can be much more subtle than this. Hopefully you've all seen The Matrix. If not, again, spoiler alert. When you look at this scene, this screenshot of Morpheus, what do you notice about the color? It's dark and blurred, a lot of shadow. What about the specific color hue, though? Okay, there it is. It's green. There's a lot of green, not just in things that should be green, like looks like there's a tree back there in the blurry background, but also his skin tone has sort of a green cast to it, right? It doesn't look natural. It doesn't look right. It's not what we would expect out in the natural world. This has been purposely color graded to look like that. And the reason being that in the Matrix, in the movie The Matrix, most of it takes place in an artificial world. It's all computer simulated. So hopefully you knew that. If not, I'm sorry, I just ruined The Matrix for you. And they wanted to give hints to that being the case. And so in the early scenes, especially, they make those scenes just look a little bit off by affecting the color in this way. And especially green is very otherworldly. It's not something we would expect. So they've given it that cast to give a subtle cue that something's not quite right. But once they get out of the matrix in the film and get into what is the quote real world of the movies, then we see suddenly the more natural tones. The skin tones become more natural. We see warm colors really for the only time in the movies, because otherwise it's all toned down to more of a cool color scheme. So it feels more alive. It feels more vital and lifelike. And that's intended. Again, it's done that way on purpose because they want you to know that now you're in this reality and this place where life actually happens. And then there's a third environment they go to, and that's outside of the safety of their city, where the evil machines, the robots, rule. And then when they get to those places, then it takes on sort of this gray, blue-gray appearance. It feels very cold, very lifeless, and that again is the intent. It's meant to feel unsafe and uninviting. So this is the way this works. This is sort of a very extreme case, but even in more traditional films or TV shows, subtle use of colors can really influence how the audience perceives particular scenes. This is a shot from Crimson Peak, which was a recent movie. This actually goes back to what I was talking about with the newscasters, where they use the blue background. You see how the complementary colors focuses attention on the woman's face because it stands out against the cool background. and the candles help pulling attention to that specific spot. And what do you see here? What is happening in this case? This is a pretty popular one with Harry Potter. How do you see color being used here to direct attention in this case? Red versus green, as Regina comments, and red versus green is a complementary pair, right? They are actually opposites on the color wheel. Okay, so okay, with red versus green in mind, how does that help direct the viewer's attention? In using those complementary colors. Good, yeah. Harry's robe is brighter, and it's also the only warm color, right? You have some yellows, but they're more towards the yellow-green, like in the Hufflepuff Tower and the Gryffindor Tower. I know way too much about Harry Potter, but not only that, but the warm red is complementary to the green, and everything else is green. So that becomes our focal point. So where our eye is naturally drawn to Harry Potter with his red Gryffindor robes, even though Draco Malfoy is larger and closer to us, his green Slytherin robes blend in with the environment, so he's not as strongly emphasized. So this is a really good example of how you can use those complementary colors to create emphasis, direct attention. You really want to plan your viewer's experience, not leaving it to chance. So you say, I want you to notice this object, and you use those colors to make that happen. And that is exactly what has been done here. And of course, in the movie, this is moving very quickly, right? They're playing Quidditch, and it's a lot of action taking place. So in order to keep your eye directed during all that action, they have made use of these colors. So in thinking about this, the books describe the colors of the robes, so they don't have any say in what color Harry's robes are going to be. They're going to be red. So with that in mind, they decided, okay, then we'll make the environment heavily green in order to make that stand out. So then they had one thing that was given to them, and then had to make that choice based on that, with their knowledge of color theory. One last example, and then we'll wrap up. We're going a little over time already. Thinking about both color theory and color psychology, how is color used in this example to emphasize the visual story? And Jennifer, I'll get to your question. And okay, your question is that in regard to this week's Photoshop practice, Jennifer? Okay. Actually, I do want you to go ahead and add text as well. So continuing to build those Photoshop skills, keep practicing what we did last week, but add in now the use of color and try to make it a visual story. Continuing to practice those skills. Oh no, you don't have to give me any kind of analysis or description. I think there were some instructions left in the assignments that caused some confusion in that regard. You're welcome to comment on it, but you don't have to. Sure, no problem. Okay. And Amanda, I saw your comment about the blue hue makes it look sad. Okay, yeah, and so the blue being the blue that's kind of shining into this area. Um, so comment a little more on that. It makes him look sad. How do you see that tying into the themes and meaning of the image in the story? Okay, so the comment is, it means just because you're out of the hospital doesn't mean all is perfect. So the blue kind of reminds us that there still could be problems ahead. Yeah, and that's really summarizes the message of the ad. And looking at this, and you kind of thinking about how color is used in the Matrix, oddly enough. If you look at the scene, the house outside of this little wooded area has a lot of warm colors, right? This is a living room, and so it's where living takes place. The wood, the couch, the wood of the table, even the carpeting has more of an orange and brown appearance. The kitchen has a lot of yellows, so it's very warm and lifelike. But all around this man is this pale blue that looks kind of ghostly. It looks kind of unhealthy, right? It looks like it's the light from a TV set, but it's used in such a way that gives him this kind of pale cast. And that's paired with these creepy dead trees. They look like they remind me of the trees that from the Wizard of Oz when they're in the forest, the haunted forest. But that combination of color and imagery combines to reinforce that idea that this person isn't healthy, that he's not, quote, out of the woods, and so there still could be a risk. So that all ties together and creates this interesting visual story that is, with kind of driven home with the text that's added. All right, so hopefully that gives you an idea of how color is used in storytelling. And so as you're working on your Photoshop practice activities, as well as your explorations tonight, really think about that. Think about how you might alter a color, in a very subtle way to change the way it might be interpreted or to make something stand out that didn't stand out before. Are there any final questions or any concerns before we wrap up?
When will the archive video be put up?
I'll try to put it up as soon, like right after class, as soon as it exports.
Awesome.
Sure. Any other questions? All right, if everyone feels like they're all set, then I'm happy to let you go for the evening, and I do appreciate you joining me tonight. Thank you very much.